Charles Morey, and I'm going to read a little bit of the foreword to Our Playhouse, a history of the Peterborough Players that was written on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the theater by Allen Sherman, and I was privileged to write the foreword for it. My first sight of the Peterborough Players was sometime in May of 1969. I was going to graduate from Dartmouth College in mid-June if I passed my final required science distributive requirement, an issue very much in question at that point. I was going to enter the MFA program in acting at Columbia University in the fall if I weren't drafted. I wasn't, but that's another story. And I was looking for a theater job to get me through the summer. From a blind mailing, I was asked if I could drive to Peterborough for an interview with Sally Stearns Brown at a time when the artistic director, Gordon Phillips, would be up from New York. I borrowed my girlfriend's car since I wasn't at all sure mine would make it, and found my way to Peterborough. I followed the directions to turn left off Main Street at the Unitarian Church and headed out a country road into the absolute blackness of a moonless rural New Hampshire night. After 3 miles, positive I was lost, I rounded a corner, passed an ancient and battered sign nailed to a tree that pointed down a potholed road between stone walls. I stopped, backed up so the headlights would illuminate the sign, shook my head, and drove down into the woods. I came upon a small farmhouse to my right and a dilapidated structure looming in the darkness to my left. Upon stepping out of the car, I was swarmed by mosquitoes. I knocked on the door of the farmhouse, was greeted warmly by Sally and Gordon, sat down nervously at the dining room table, and didn't really leave until 25 years later. And perhaps emotionally, I never have left and never will, because it was around that dining room table that I learned everything of any importance I ever knew about the theater and a great deal else. Sometime that evening, Gordon took me out to see the theater. The power was off and our flashlights illuminated a wildly cluttered space that was very definitely, well, a barn. If I didn't actually say it, I surely thought, you gotta be kidding, this can't be a theater. I didn't get it. But I liked Sally and Gordon. I needed a job and I didn't have any other offers. Strange, isn't it? And sometimes wonderful, how our lives are definitively shaped by walking through a door simply because it happens to be the only one open. 4 weeks later, I graduated from Dartmouth on a rainy June morning, and that afternoon started my career with the Peterborough Players. A few weeks after that, when the '69 season opened, I got it. It was a perfect late June New Hampshire evening, cool and dry enough to keep the mosquitoes at bay. The sun was setting through the maples, dappling the intimate grass-covered courtyard with a lighting effect we could only dream of reproducing on stage. Patrons began to filter in from the parking lot, men in seersucker jackets and ties and women in light summer dresses. It was 1969, the last gasp of an era in which most still dressed to go to the theater. In fact, it was expected of Players' staff that if we were to be in front of the public, we would dress appropriately, and that meant a jacket and tie, no matter how hot it might be. Sometime after 8 o'clock, the curtain was 8:40 in those civilized days. Sally appeared from the farmhouse and casually greeted by name virtually every individual patron. The audience filtered into the barn through what we called the Coke Bar, upon the walls of which were signboards announcing every play done at the Peterborough Players over the previous 36 years. Inside the barn itself, the evening sun touched lightly upon the screens and the large barn doors, and more candelabra than any contemporary fire marshal could begin to tolerate bathed the space in a warm and inviting amber. Flowers, lilacs and peonies, daisies, snapdragons, and mountain laurel, which Sally had cut from the garden that afternoon, overflowed vases on the baby grand piano in the corner, under the low shed roof, and on bookcases at the entrance. When the house lights went to half, 2 young women walked to the front of the auditorium, split to either side, and extinguished the candles. Then joined together house right, where one knocked with a candle snuffer 3 times on the wall next to the ancient 12 by 12 post that defined the proscenium. The performance began. I've worked in and seen many a performance in some of the most handsomely appointed and beautifully equipped theaters in the world, but I don't think I've ever encountered a space that was so perfectly and naturally theatrical, so ideally suited for the storytelling event as that old barn. Its proportions were classically perfect, its acoustics ideal, its intimacy absolutely unforced, its charm so complete that audiences automatically forgave a multitude of sins. The barn itself was, and happily remains throughout its many renovations, the classic post and beam New England barn. In the old days, pre-1984, the one building served as performance space, rehearsal hall, and scene shop rolled into one. There was no air conditioning. Big barn doors with screens provided the only ventilation. The screens served as minimal protection against omnipresent mosquitoes the size of sparrows, and before every performance, we fogged the barn for mosquitoes. The dressing rooms were in the old cow tie-up, the box office and business office, and the former woodshed. The theater accommodated 149 patrons on uncomfortable folding chairs. Every night, all the chairs were struck so we could rehearse on the barn floor the next day. And then, after rehearsal, those same chairs were reset for the evening performance. Doing the chairs was a daily ritual routinely bemoaned by apprentices of every era, and equally routinely mythologized as the primal bonding experience when reconsidered through the haze of nostalgia. The company in those days was tiny. An artistic director who directed all 5 shows, a business manager, one designer who did sets, lights, and costumes for all productions, a technical director, an equity company of 6, including a stage manager who also acted, thanks to a concession from Actors Equity Association. That was me in my 2nd through 4th seasons. A group of about 20 apprentices and Sally. There was no time, there were no resources, there was no money, but most of us who went there for a summer were committed and enthusiastic, mostly young, of course, mostly capable, and in some cases far more than capable. And despite the fact the resources were meager, when everybody cooperated and found a way to tell a particular story honestly at its simplest level, and the temperature humidity index and the mosquitoes cooperated, there was frequently work of which we were very proud, and occasionally work of which the best could be said, well, it only ran 2 weeks. I guess I didn't know it right away, but I'd been hooked. I don't know when it was. Maybe it was that first evening when I saw a community gather in the barn to hear a story. Maybe it was on stage a few weeks later playing Bernard to Bob Alvin's Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman. Maybe it was around the dining room table after a show with a cold bottle of Miller High Life, a block of what Sally always called rat cheese, and the ubiquitous can of Sells brand liver pate, listening to the stories of summers past and the rich Peterborough Players tradition into which I found myself so graciously welcomed. I am quite certain I was not hooked by my first and only summer living in the old cabins on the farm, which made the Northwest logging camps in which I'd passed my college summers seem luxurious. To be perfectly honest, however, I do think I know what, or more accurately, whom it was who made me a Peterborough player for life. It was Sally. Sally Stearns Brown was the daughter of Edith Bond Stearns, who had founded the Players in the barn at her summer home in 1933. Sally was managing director by title, producer in fact, owner of the farm in part, and wholly heart and soul of the place. She was a woman of enormous kindness and generosity of spirit, humble to a fault, and with real intelligence and taste. She ran the theater not to fulfill her own ambitions, but so that others could fulfill theirs. And because she couldn't imagine not having a theater in her backyard, having grown up with a house full of theater folk every summer, Sally's spirit will always be, for me, the genius of that place. Sally had the unique ability to make one feel as if the Peterborough Players simply could not exist without your personal involvement. I never knew EBS, but I'm told she had exactly the same effect on people. Maybe it's a tool all managers of nonprofit theaters of meager resources should have in their bags of tricks. But in the case of EBS and later Sally, I believe it was utterly genuine. Their concern was only for the Peterborough players, the people and the place. They loved both with an unselfishness that was infectious. And as that infection has passed through generation after generation of Peterborough players, it has created an institution that has far outlived and outgrown the wildest imagination of those few hardy souls who gathered one June evening in 1933 to share the improbable first performance of Alfred Cranborg's verse play, Mannikin and Minnikin. We all know that theater is ephemeral. And theater on a summer night in that old barn with a light breeze coming through the screens and the sound of crickets underscoring each scene is somehow even more so. We all know that words can never adequately describe the theatrical event itself, much less 75 years worth of plays and the actors, directors, designers, craftspeople, technicians, interns, apprentices, administrators, donors, board members, and audiences who made them happen. But this is important. This history should be written. Too many people have given too much of themselves, and the magic of the Peterborough players has touched too many lives for it not to be recorded. This is a good story. It should be told. I'd like to conclude by reading a little speech from my play, Laughingstock, a play which has been performed twice at the Players now over the years. And it's a play about a summer theater in a barn in the woods of New Hampshire. And at the end of the first scene, the artistic director is showing a young actor around the theater in the middle of February when the place is a mess, just all cluttered and could look looks nothing like a theater at all. I know what it looks like now, but come summer, July, beautiful New England evening, the sun setting back of our mountain, like Mr. Wilder says. And sometimes the sunset slants across the roof through the sugar maples and catches the screens in those big barn doors with a lighting effect you could only dream about recreating on a stage. And other times, the evening light is so clear, it makes everything stand out like an impressionist painting. Crickets. And then a couple of hundred people come here to sit in the dark on uncomfortable chairs in a 200-year-old barn with no air conditioning to watch us act out stories. Why? It's a complete mystery to me, a miracle of sorts. Who could not want to be a part of that?